All right, Jennifer Fish and I are here to talk to you about assets and Jira Service Management. Assets is our native asset and configuration management tool for Jira Service Management. It gives teams a flexible and dynamic way to track all kinds of assets. We have some customers tracking fish, some tracking pianos, and then of course our more practical IT use cases like laptops, etc. So you can track all kinds of assets and CIs or configuration items rather to enable your teams to easily link these items to services, requests, incidents, problems, changes, and workloads. So this having something like assets is going to enable us to understand and visualize those critical relationships that we have between applications and services, their underlying infrastructure, and other dependencies. I'll do a little bit of background in slides for you, and then Jennifer is going to go into a brief demo. So let's cover a little bit of background here, why asset management is important, what is exciting about having assets in Jira Service Management. So with assets, our IT teams can close service requests faster because they're able to link customer assets or objects. Of course, they are people, right? But for the sake of asset management, we refer to them as objects directly to an issue or a request. And you're able to view these assets, objects directly from our issue view. You're also able to minimize risk by understanding the full downstream impact of a change because you have that added context from our asset repository. Adding this context to issues enables better troubleshooting. You can resolve major incidents faster, or at Atlassian, as we like to say, at high velocity. You're also able to gain visibility of the full infrastructure to better locate and solve underlying problems. You can track assets to aid in your planning, audits, for example, a technology refresh, and compliance activities. Assets is built on the Jira Service Management platform, so teams using Jira Service Management can quickly and easily tie these assets and configurations to service requests, incidents, problems, changes, and workload. And we're just going to talk a little bit about the architecture that we're using in assets. So this image shows you 3 levels of the data hierarchy within the asset and configuration management system, and each is open and defined by the user. So we have object schemas that you can think of as separate asset repositories or configuration management databases that can be linked to each other. And these help our users break their data into more logical, manageable chunks to keep the data updated and secure. Then we have object types, which define the objects that you want to store. So each of these have a set of attributes that defines what that object is. So some examples: hosts, cloud instances, monitors, and anything that you'd like. And then we have the objects themselves, where you can apply all of those attributes and relationships. Next, we'll talk a little bit about dependency mapping. So our service dependency mapping provides a graphical representation of data that's captured through discovery, identification, normalization, and reconciliation of service assets. Our solutions capabilities enable teams to make better decisions regarding the service delivery more quickly, accurately, and efficiently. One of the main challenges that we have here in high speed is keeping the information updated. Asset and CI data can very quickly become stale and inaccurate, which impacts the system usefulness. So here in Jira Service Management, we're addressing the need of auto-discovery of an on-premise environments like data centers, offices, and branches with the help of our native discovery tool. So let's just talk a little bit more about what that is and the different ways that you can put data into your repository. There's a few different ways that you can get this information into Jira Service Management. You can leverage our discovery tool, which is agentless scanning. You can use our integrations. You're also able to import using CSV, JSON, LDAP, and more. So let's talk a little bit more about our native discovery tool called Assets Discovery. So this is a network scanning tool that can be used with or without an agent. We'll detect hardware and software on your local network, and we can get detailed information about each asset on your network. Then you'll be able to import that data into assets in Jira Service Management. You can download this in the Atlassian Marketplace. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, but I just want to make very clear, we we also accept data in CSV, JSON, and database file formats in case your source system does not have a standard API. We also have integration capabilities with other market-leading solutions, and we're always looking at adding more, of course. Currently, we have AWS, Azure, Jamf, Device42, and more. I don't want to bore you with the full list, but we also have our API fully documented as well for your needs should you need to leverage our open API. So again, before Jennifer goes into her demo portion, we're fast approaching that. This is the last slide before we dive in. I do want to just mention that we do have some customers that are using our assets in Jira Service Management to manage inventory of fish, luxury vehicles. We've got some certifications here that you can also track with assets. Additionally, we have heard of some folks using assets to track vaccination records. We have endpoints like laptop. And my personal favorite, which we'll get into a little bit later, is Whiskey. If you have time, I think many of you are probably familiar with Tanya. She was a community leader and is now an Atlassian employee. And she has an assets repository of Whiskey that she made with Kathy Davey, a solutions engineer here. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Kate. I am also going to go off video to ensure my bandwidth can stay optimal during the demo. And again, appreciate everyone being here today. Looking forward to sharing assets with you. So my background is ITSM. I've been in that environment for quite some time. And previous to joining Atlassian, I was at a large healthcare integrated provider and managing about 5 million assets in a healthcare environment. So I can bring some experience. And if we want to dig really deep in certain areas, happy to do that. So for the folks that don't have any experience, we're going to start very high level, and I'll ask team members and participants that have a little bit more context and experience to kind of bear with me as we go through it. Start off with the asset functionality. So you can see the capabilities where the assets really bring a lot of power to the Jira platform. And at Atlassian, the highest volume for our tickets at our service desk are related to laptops. So that's a terrific area for us to start with. So we're going to start with laptops. And to access assets, here's where we would have our projects. To access assets, we will click here and see a number of the integrations that Kate spoke about. Our Device42. We have interfaces with Google Cloud, Snow for software configuration management. But to kind of keep things simple, we're just kind of dipping our toe into it. We're going to focus on laptops. So we're going to start here, and we have a universal search bar, so I can type in laptops, and I can see a different set of lists. And so here I bring back and see we have a couple different options for laptops. Let's start with our assets. So we'll start with laptops here, and wanting to walk through that we have underneath IT hardware, we have a list of laptops, and then we have a hardware catalog. We'll talk a bit more about the catalog a little bit later on, but let's dive in and see some of the different options that we can track for my laptop. So again, this is a pretty classic, pretty traditional capabilities, different attributes for tracking assets and CIs. That's one of the things that's a bit different than we would see in other ITSM systems. In other ITSM systems, there's a distinct segregation between IT asset practices and service configuration management. And joining Atlassian, when I first started to engage with assets, I was scratching my head a little bit, to be quite honest. I was scratching my head going, wait, we're putting both of these practices into the same schema, into the same container. And the more I worked with it, the more I realized it was a brilliant approach, because what I found working in other systems is that when we keep the data separate, teams don't use the data separate. We use the data together. We want to know where this thing is located and what else. There's a lot of different components that overlap when it comes to assets and service configuration management, and storing them in a single location actually is an effective and efficient way of ensuring that the data is maintained throughout the practices, and that we don't run into problems with having a configuration item status out of date with what the asset status is, where the asset says it's in maintenance and the CI says it's up and running. So having it as part of a single repository is a really powerful approach. So I know I said a lot there. I get a little energized when I talk about assets because I think how Atlassian approaches it's a pretty cool architecture. So again, we track all the traditional activities. We see relationships where we have references, we have owned by and the different financial components, because working in IT asset management, we know it's all about our partners in IT finance. So we have our components for contracts, for POs, for another thing that's very important when we're dealing with CI and assets is the activities on it. So we have a detailed list of all the different attributes we want to track. As Kate called out, these are all user defined. It's very easy to add new attributes. The other thing is that we have activities. We can track anyone who's had to go through a compliance audit with assets, know that we need to know where this asset was, when it changed location, who changed location, when it went into maintenance, etc. We have a full capability to track with laptops. Let's also talk a little bit more about the different references that we have. We talked here about having locations, finance, different models. We also see here that we have a relationship to the Jamf integration. Jamf is a mobile device management system that we use internally at Atlassian for tracking the software on our laptops and phones. So we can click there, drill into it, where I could look into additional configuration information. And we're getting down to the little details here that may be helpful in some troubleshooting, but not always something that we want to have on our main screen because it gets a little bit cluttered. And it's also, I want to call this out because it highlights the assets approach to having schemes that are logical groupings of data, so that what we can do is have a schema for laptops and then a separate schema for different integrations, for example, for Jamf or for Google Cloud. And then from there, we can use that information to federate it and through automation, keep our records updated. So I've said a lot there. I think I feel like I've had the microphone a lot. Any questions? Why don't I pause for a second and see if anyone has some questions. Kate, anything in chat we want to address?
We have a question. Jimmy just came up with a good one. He asked, what logic best practices do you use when deciding if something should be an attribute of an object versus a separate object?
Really good question. It's how many times is it going to be referenced and what's the maintenance on it? So for example, let's use this one here that we have on the screen. We have a PO that for this laptop. Well, on this PO, we'll have several laptops. So it's important to be able to have that one PO referenced in multiple places, and that PO will be used in other organizations' practices, like IT finance will use that PO and have a whole separate set of workflow for it. So that would be something I would have as a separate object and just have a relationship to it. Did that answer your question, Jimmy? Okay, cool. We will talk about automation. Actually, it's part of our demo that we'll get to in just a second. Okay.
There's one more. Carolyn has a question about best practices around tags. So I don't know if there's something high level we could share in the meantime.
Well, I really want to make sure I understand how we're using the term tags, because within assets, it's a little bit different than what we would see in like Jira Software or in Jira Service Management. We have labels, and labels are, and I dig into this a little bit when we walk through building out the structures, but for assets, we have a label which is a unique identifier, that we make a unique identifier, and it shows up every time this asset is referenced. So on the example we have here in laptops, name is our label, and I can show you a little bit more if I go into the attributes. That'll be a better screen to look at. So let's look at, so name is our label, and we can tell it's our label because we have a little icon here. And this is whenever we reference laptops, this particular data will show up in that reference, and we can make it any length that we want. It's pretty versatile. So did I answer your question there?
Yeah, it was really referencing Kate's screenshot in her presentation. I think the field said tags, so it probably was a label field named tags, but they were very, very, very long. Like you couldn't even see the whole thing on the screen. So I was wondering if that is something that maybe Kate could address because that was on her screen, but it doesn't look like you have anything similar.
Well, while Kate's looking for that, I'll fill in a little bit with regards to, we can get some pretty long pieces of information like model names. For when you're doing asset management, model names can be really lengthy. And so in assets, we have a lot of flexibility. If we want to ensure that something that we want to present on a screen is a bit short, maybe more informative, we have actually, let's dig into this in assets and attributes. We can, for example, in text, if we wanted to look at this, we can have validation, which I think is a super cool function. And I'm sorry if I sound like a complete nerd, but it's super cool that really easily within the screen itself, we can build out regular expressions to ensure, like, for example, that the serial number has a particular format that for data integrity, that our IP addresses have a particular format. We can just use something like text or URL for validation as well. So there's a lot of functionality that if we want to make sure that those tags are short, that we could have validation for that as well. Thanks for that question. And thanks for giving me an opportunity to kind of get a little bit further into this. So let's go ahead, if it's okay with everyone, let's switch over to show, we've got a little bit of background, we've seen a little bit of the capability, and we're starting to get a bit of an understanding about, let's see how it's used in Jira Service Management from our portal, and then we'll show it on the agent screen. And then after that, we'll take some more questions, and then we'll really dig into how we build it, and we can pull up screens and really tear things apart. How does that sound for the next, let's say, 10 minutes? Agile practices and Scrum practices is start where you are. One of the things that we've seen a lot with, trying to engage in asset management, trying to engage in service configuration management and CMDBs, it's a little overwhelming. Where do I start? Well, start where you have the highest volume. And as I mentioned at ASEAN, our highest volume is with laptops. We break our laptops, we can't get laptops to work, we've got VPN issues, so we're going to start with laptops. And the power supply on my laptop is not working. It's got a problem. So we see here we have some different suggested articles. But the power supply, I don't see anything that's helping me with my power supply, just the power supply is broken. And I can click here, and what'll happen is it'll bring up the laptop that is associated with me. So while we have a lot of laptops, we saw there was quite a few, it will bring up the laptop that's associated with me because we've built in automation to bring up only data in the laptop schema that is related to the user that's on behalf of. If I change this over to Kate, it would bring up Kate's laptop. So that's some automation that we've built in here. So let's go ahead and we'll submit this. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's just that simple to do. So let's look at it from the agent's perspective. So on an agent screen, we'll see that we have our laptop right here front and center, and we can open up the pane and see additional information about this laptop. I can see the model it is, I can see a serial number, and right here I see this thing is going to expire. The warranty is going to expire pretty soon, next month. And let's see what other things we have going on with it. We can click here and we can get more of an object view. We can drill down into it. I can see, it's for Jennifer Fish. She has this in a home office. If I need to take a look at the PO, I can drill down more into it. I can also see here, again, more details. I drill into it, and then I can see the linked issues. And I see right now that I have a linked issue that the power supply is not working, and it's assigned out. So that gives us a lot of details. If I had more issues associated with this laptop, they would also show up here. So from that, I can take a look and say, this thing is currently damaged. So I'm going to go ahead and I think I need to get a new laptop, which I'm pretty excited about. So I'm going to resolve this, and the resolution I'm going to select is that we have a hardware failure. We'll get you a new device. That'll be great. And I'll resolve that. And some additional automation, when I do a refresh here, if things are working today, is that we'll see, when I take a look at this, we'll see that this asset is now marked as damaged. And we put a little note here in our service request letting the agent know that the asset's been updated and it's set to damage. Now, if we wanted to do additional automation, say kick off some workflow to have a new laptop ordered and start that process, get it approved, we could also do that. So actually, I think I forgot all the workflow we put together. Actually, we did do that. We linked it to a new device, a new request, and I see here that my manager, Ken Connolly, it's waiting for his approval. So we can put together a number of linkages and automations to complete. Now we have a closed loop system. So now not only have we requested a new laptop, we've marked our current laptop as damaged. So our asset is updated. We know its status. We've also put in a service request to get a new laptop approved and get that shipped out to our customer, to me, and pretty quickly. So with that, I know that didn't take me 10 minutes. Do we have any questions we want to dig into there, Kate?
There's one, we do have some more extensive questions, but there's a quick one. And the question is the system looking the serial number up to determine warranty expiration, or is this being manually entered? And the question's from Julia. Thanks, Julia.
Okay, Julia, good question. So let me make sure I understood it. So is it using the serial number to look it up? We can do it. Let's take a look at let me go back and take a look at my previous asset. And the answer to your question is we can define references however you want to define those references. So when you're loading data, we can base it off a serial number, we can base it off of an asset tag, et cetera. So it's however you define it. For this particular, I'm just trying to think on this particular item, how is it set up? And if I look over here for the warranty, it is defined by, do a quick look at it. We'll take a look at my laptop, and we are linking the warranty contract. I think it's back to the entire model. It's not for this particular serial number. I think it's done by the entire model. I'm not exactly sure, but to finish out, you could do it either way, Julia. You could do it by serial number, you could do it by PO, you could do it either way. In some cases, you may want to do it by the in-service date. Okay, hopefully
Awesome.
I answered that question.
Yep, Julia wrote thank you in the chat. Thanks, Julia.
Okay, great. Yeah, Julia, you and I can have a long conversation about serial numbers and making sure that those are unique. It always gets very challenging. So cool. Let's take a little look at a different perspective, and let's talk about services. When we start working on assets, there is a default schema of services. And this default schema of services, it's used as a connector. Services, folks that are very familiar with Jira Service Management, you're used to using services to be able to connect together, like for a major incident, what service is being affected by that major incident. And that's going to be something that you could have a variety within an organization. You could have your financial services, you could have your website, you could have your HR service, you could have a number of different services. And one of the things that we do within assets is we track those services within schemas. So when you start with assets, you'll have we have a default schema defined for services, and within that we have one object defined, and that's for the demo service, and we use that for our product tours. So that provides a lot of capabilities to be able to link together, as I mentioned, incidents with services, changes. So for example, if I have a change and we have a change and it's on a particular server, I could take a look at that server. I could see the difference from that server. I can see the different services that will be impacted based off of that change, such that I can understand the upstream risks and evaluate that as part of my change. And I see here that with this particular server, it's attached to my finance application, and the finance application is also impacting procurement as well as billing. And billing, I see here, has an open incident on it. So perhaps I may want to think a little bit more whether or not this is a good time to move forward with this particular change. So I went pretty fast across services and how services are defined within assets. And what I'd like to do is maybe put a pin in services. We'll come back to it a couple more times as we go through building out functionality. And then if we have more questions, then we can dig further. So this is my favorite part. Showing how it works is all fun, but I really enjoy building out workflows. And I'm switching over to a brand new instance. And I saw a question in the chat about Insight. So last year, this time, Insight was a third-party terrific application. Atlassian has purchased that and has been rebranded to Assets. It's also been refactored and rebuilt in the platform. Last year, if you started pulling apart Assets, you were starting from scratch for everything. But one of the things that we've introduced, it was in July timeframe, was schema templates. And if you haven't had a chance to work with schema templates, I think they're just fantastic. And so if we look here, we have some basic building blocks that are key to any inventory management. We have asset management for tracking, as Kate called out before, our basic IT, servers, laptops, phones, printers. We can add storage to this, etc. We also have two other components because that's the key to service configuration management. It's the relationships that are really important. And when you start to build out a system, to all of the folks that don't have any experience with building out asset management, is that you need to understand what you want to track. So I want to track laptops, but what are the other pieces that are important to me? So, where is that laptop located? Well, why do I care? Well, if I work in the San Francisco office and we have on-site, then that would be important for dispatching. It's also important for that asset aspect because that's also used for chargebacks and taxes. So location is an important thing for us to know. So that's one aspect we want to be able to know what facility or what location this is in. And then also with regards to asset management is who has it, who has custody of this asset, what department is responsible for this asset. So you also have the people portion of it. So those are some really important building blocks. So when you start to look at building out your assets and your configurations, is think about what are the different pieces that are important to track. Start real simple, and then you can always add in more. So we'll start off, as I said, let's build out some of these. So we're going to start with facilities. And facilities is a pretty simple data structure. And it's a pretty simple data structure, but it's a good data structure for us to use because it's a good way of demonstrating a lot of different functionality. So let's start here with buildings. And again, I'm going to go off the camera as I go through this because I'm going to go pretty fast, and I'm always concerned my video is going to fail. And also, I feel a little bit more comfortable. I'll be honest about it. So let's look at attributes. So one of the things we talked about earlier is there are four key attributes. There are four attributes that come with any schema that we create. Key, that's the unique identifier, record identifier. Name, and we talked about name is the attribute that's associated with the label, and the label shows up in every reference. That is the second attribute. Then when the record was created and when it was last updated. So those are out of the box. And then we can add in what comes with the templates are going to be pretty straightforward. Street address, city, postal code, barcode. It's like, really? Barcode? For delivery, barcode can be very, very important to know if you're doing some matching between delivery systems and where it got dropped off. Barcode can be really helpful. So those are some really important capabilities. Let's dive a little bit further into this barcode. So I can change it. I could set the barcode to be the label. So, Julia, back to your question, if we wanted to, when we dig into the assets themselves, we can make the serial number the label and use that. We have a lot of flexibility. We can also, for data integrity, we can define that a particular attribute will be unique. We have cardinality where, if we want to have a min and max value for our validation. And then we also talked about the regular expressions. We can have an email, text, URL, or any other type of regular expression you want to define here. So we have a lot of capability just at your fingertips. And this capability can be, we have I'm jumping around here a little bit. We have we're all used to it because we're used to Jira software and Jira Service Management, that we have roles. So we can also define roles that will allow, various schemas and objects to be accessed by different teams. So if we want one team to be able to manage their own assets, and this is one of the things that occurred a number of times in enterprises, is when you have IT managing all the assets, other organizations like operations, the storage team, they want to have more control over their assets, being able to change the attributes, being able to have a bit different configuration. Well, because we have a robust set of role definitions we can implement, it gives us more flexibility to have teams manage their schemas and their objects and attributes. So that gives us a lot of capabilities. Sorry for bouncing around a little bit there. So that gives us I think we're pretty good right now with regards to buildings and information for our attributes. Let's go ahead and build out an object just real quickly. We're going to, let's call this the San Francisco office. My typing is terrible today. And we're going to say it. And we're going to skip over some of this. We can make some of these things, again, for data validation and data integrity, we can make these attributes required. But just for the sake of moving along and not watching me fumble, we'll just put in a few attributes. And let's go ahead and take a look now at the floor object or object type. So the floor object type, it has much fewer attributes than what we had with building. And again, maybe we don't need to have that much information about a floor. You know, it's related to a building. We have a floor barcode, again, it's helpful for our delivery. But let's look a little bit here. Maybe we need to add in a attribute for status. We're doing a lot of remodeling up in San Francisco, and we want to put in a floor status because we may have a floor that's shut down for right now, and that'd be helpful for us to know if we're in facilities and we're thinking about, you know, having a conference room available for other teams. So we're going to have floor status, and this also gives us an opportunity to talk about the different type of attributes we can define. We can have a default, and the default allows us to define it as text, integer, all of the standard types of data we would want to be able to define. A select value, IP addresses, pretty robust set there. We also have capability to have objects. And what an object type is, that allows us to define a reference. So we see it right here where we have an object, and now we're referencing buildings. And then in the additional value, that allows us, and we'll dig a little bit more into this, that allows us to define the relationship. So we see that this is a dependency, but we can get much more granular. We could say, if we didn't like it saying dependency, we could say it's located in. So that's a best practice. So we also have users. Users would allow us to associate a user in a Jira group to this object. We have groups that, of course, would allow us to associate a Jira group to this object. Projects. You see a theme here. We can associate a Jira project to this object. We also have status. And this would allow us to associate to the object, and we'll have a bit more information about statuses. These are the ones that are currently defined for this particular schema, and we can have others as well. And last but not least, a new capability is associating a Bitbucket repository to an object. So this could be really powerful when we start to have assets that are related to, software development. If we have a particular application, or a particular code set, we could have that related to a Bitbucket repository. So there's a lot of flexibilities there, and we're including more. Bitbucket repository is something new added just recently. So I've gone over a lot there, but let's say we're just going to go ahead and have status, and we'll add that in. And that will pretty much complete us with our floor status. And let's go ahead and create a floor. So we'll put in floor 13. And I don't have a barcode, but I do want to associate it with the San Francisco office. We're going to mark that as active. And now let's take a look at rooms. So we'll create an object here for rooms, and we're just going to call this, we'll have a Sage conference room. And we want to we're going to select the floor that's associated with, and we want to add in here a quick attribute of room type. So I know the differences between offices, and I know the differences between conference rooms, et cetera, shared spaces. So let's put a type in here, and it'll be default. And this gives us an opportunity to see here, and this circles back around a little bit to Jimmy's question about when do you have it as an object, or when do you define something as a separate object, or when do you just have it as an attribute? Having a room type as a separate attribute, as a separate object, really doesn't make sense because I don't have that many of them. So we're just going to define out a conference room.
Do you just want to give a quick heads up? We're on the 2-minute mark time left. I know there's a good number of questions we haven't answered, and I will find the best way working with the different community leaders to get those answers to you.
We'll build these out real fast, and we'll see very quickly. I apologize. I lost track of time there. You can tell how excited I get about things. We have employees, departments, as well as roles. And then we could cancel that. If we come back to assets, we could build out one more schema and we see assets. We'll create that from scratch. Here we have all of our capabilities for hardware assets, and we also have model management, which is key to asset management, where we would define our models such that we would have a single model, and then that model would be used throughout the hardware assets and the object definitions. That is a quick run through of assets. And then if we had things that are not part of it and we wanted to create a new asset, we can also, got it there, let me close that out. If I want to create a schema and just have it created blank, we could have just a test schema, and we would start there from scratch, and this is where we would start adding our object type. This provides us capabilities to do even more with our tracking if we had things that are more unique, like fish, pianos, whiskey.
All right, great. So with that, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to do so and hope you learned a little bit today. I'm just going to pull up the list of questions. So one of the questions we got, Jennifer, was in the first example that you walked through, how were locations configured?
Okay, location, I'll share my screen and we'll go back to the initial. If we look at the location here, it's in a separate schema. And so we had it underneath. This highlights the flexibility. Whereas in the templates, and why I like to put facilities in a separate schema, in this particular definition, we have it defined underneath employees is our schema. And then underneath offices, we have an object type of offices underneath employees. And then within that, we had like home offices. So if we looked at offices here, we would see the objects of the Amsterdam office, home offices, remote, etc. So there's multiple ways you can define locations. If you have facilities management, you may want to break out offices as a separate schema, but if you don't have a number of offices, you could have it as just underneath employees, whatever is going to be best for your organization.
All right, so I think with that, I know a lot of folks have to go back to work, so we will end here. It was really good to see all of you and chat with you. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that great walkthrough. Really appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you again, Kate and Jennifer, for joining today. Lots of awesome questions answered, and obviously people are really excited to dig into this tool. Just a shout out to everyone here. Thank you for sticking around. If this was your first Atlassian community event, welcome. They're super fun, and you can always find more at ace.com. Highly recommend jumping into a local community for an in-person event or joining virtual events like this one.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.